You're being compared to Viktor Orban. You can only be great for the press.
Hungary's newly elected Prime Minister Peter Magyar says he wants to overhaul state media and support a free press. And changes are already underway.
Those independent outlets that had survived the 16 years of Orbanism will continue to be the main source of information for much of the country. The other ones, those ones who were on government payroll, will have a very tough time building their reputation back.
From WNYC in New York, this is On the Media. I'm Brooke Gladstone. Also on this week's show, a political career cut short.
Multiple women have accused Swalwell of sexual misconduct and assault.
Breaking news coming just 20 minutes ago, Eric Swalwell announcing he's suspending his run for California's governor.
Set in motion by a whisper campaign and a couple of influencers.
The story comes out and they all just burst into tears.
It's all coming up after this.
WNYC Studios is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
From WNYC in New York, this is On the Media. Micah Lowenger's out this week. I'm Brooke Gladstone. 2 weeks ago, Eric Swalwell was a Democratic congressional representative, a cable news darling, and one of the top candidates running to be the next governor of California. But then,
multiple women have accused Swalwell of sexual misconduct and assault.
This Capitol Hill staffer is coming forward for the first time on camera to talk about her experience with Congressman Eric Swalwell.
I kept figuring out ways to blame myself. Well, Eric shouldn't have raped me.
One woman telling the San Francisco Chronicle that she had several sexual encounters with the congressman while working in his office. She also accused him of sexually assaulting her twice while she was too intoxicated to consent.
The Democratic representative denies the accusations, posting this video Friday night.
These allegations of sexual assault are flat false. They are absolutely false. They did not happen. They have never happened. And I will fight them with everything that I have.
Today, Lana Drews, a former model, coming forward to say that Swalwell assaulted her in his hotel room in 2018.
He raped me, and he choked me, and while he was choking me, I lost consciousness, and I thought I died.
Eric Swalwell announcing he's suspending his run for California's governor.
And this scandal now widening tonight. Congressman Eric Swalwell resigning from Congress. It's now official.
The path this story took into the public eye was swift and unusual. It began with a series of messages sent to Ariel Fodor, a creator better known as Mrs. Frazzled, with 1.4 million followers on TikTok and around 760,000 on Instagram. She's a former kindergarten teacher who focuses on education policy.
A new government watchdog report found that the Department of Education basically stopped doing some of its most important oversight of student loan companies last year.
Fodor posted a story on Instagram with a positive message about Swalwell, and then the messages started showing up in her inbox.
It was a warning. It was a warning about Eric Swalwell.
Melanie Mason is Politico's California bureau chief and co-author with Jeremy B. White of the recent piece, The Whisper Network That Caught Up to Eric Swalwell.
She heard from two strangers and also a friend of hers, and they were all sort of variations on the same theme, which is, you know he sleeps with his staffers, right? Or don't give him your phone number because he'll text you late at night. For her, it was pretty jarring because she thought that he was a, at least decent candidate for governor, and that's what sort of set her off on this quest.
She has a huge number of contacts among Democratic staffers. She started asking people, have you heard anything about this?
That's right. Because there's so much desire for these politicians to get on her platform, to reach her audience, they all are courting her and other influencers. So she has the phone numbers of all of these staffers and all of these campaign operatives and, quite frankly, all of these lawmakers. I mean, I think us reporters would actually be quite jealous. And so she was able to poke around. And what she heard back was, yes, there are rumors about this, or yes, this happened to a friend of mine. And when she'd say, well, why don't you say anything? The response that she got back was, well, that's just the way it is.
That's just the way it is.
That's just the way it is. This is what Washington's like.
Was she stunned?
I think she was stunned because we had just gone through this reckoning not all that long ago. But, thinking back on the MeToo movement, Congress was actually somewhat spared from that back in 2017, 2018. And if you're a young staffer coming up and people just say, oh, of course he's texting you late at night, that's just what he does, I think that you then think, okay, I guess this is what the culture is.
Yeah. Rumors were dogging his campaign practically from the start. There's a longtime Democratic strategist, Mike Trujillo, who'd heard a story back in 2017 about a friend of a friend who'd had a negative experience with Swalwell. And since then, he kept hearing similar stories. So then in December, a month after Swalwell decided that he was going to run for governor, unusually late to jump into a race like that, Trujillo posted on social media that Swalwell had slept with interns, sexually harassed women, sent weird texts late at night. He wrote, "Endorse at your own peril." Did he have an axe to grind?
He absolutely had an axe to grind. I mean, he's a political operative. I mean, as he told me, everything I do is political. And I assume that everybody sees what I do is political. He's a very close ally of Antonio Villaraigosa, who's the former Los Angeles mayor, also somebody that's running for governor. But I do think that there is also a crusading aspect of this because he had been hearing these rumors for so long. And it's the culmination of what's been sort of this years-long squirreling away of little bits of threads and tips and sort of half-baked anecdotes that he then started pitching to reporters.
Trujillo's post went viral, got 140,000 views. Eventually, he had to pull it because Swalwell's campaign sent a cease and desist letter, tried to discredit Trujillo as a source for this story. But the rumors compelled power brokers to finally bring them up to Swalwell directly. He wanted endorsements. He wanted money. They asked if there was anything to the story.
Because their credibility is at stake as well. A major endorser like SEIU California, for example, can really be the difference maker when it comes to maybe pushing somebody into frontrunner status. And so there was a lot of conversation before they decided who to endorse. And in addition to the questions of what is your policy stance or what is your political beliefs, there was the question of, is there anything that's going to embarrass you and by extension embarrass us? And sometimes very directly. I mean, I think they would ask, did you sleep with staff members? Across the board, what I've heard from people is that he denied it. And not just denied it, but denied it so emphatically that people were inclined to believe him. I think that people are so used to hearing politicians use all of their hedge words and maybe try to give themselves some wiggle room. And because he was so definitive in saying there's no there there, there's nothing going on, they chose to take him at his word.
He also apparently lied to his campaign staffers. One of them you quote saying, "The dude deserves an effing Academy Award for Liar of the Year."
He had a call with his senior staff hours before these stories dropped. They then were aware that these stories were coming, and they have a Zoom call with him, and his senior staff, who are all women, by the way, are pelting him with questions for an hour. They came away feeling satisfied that he was telling the truth. An hour later, when CNN sent an email saying, here are the facts that we're prepared to report, these senior staffers saw this, and several of them resigned on the spot. They were so disgusted by what they read.
I want to back up a bit here to Mrs. Frazzled. Long before this story broke, she starts to act. In February, she posted a cryptic message expressing disappointment in a Congress member, which sounds to me like some sort of Walter Winchell, what movie star was canoodling with her co-star in the back of Sardi's? But it still managed to elicit a message from Swalwell's then campaign manager, Yardena Wolf. Bring me back to that moment.
This very cryptic post was sent to me, and I'm sure other reporters saying, you know this is about Swalwell, right? Not by her.
You didn't have to guess.
Yeah. It sounded like that got back to Yardena as well, because she sent a message and it just said, I heard you had some concerns stemming from these horrible rumors that started from a tweet from a staffer for an opponent. You know, if you have any concerns, I'd love to talk to you about it. And I think that Mrs. Frazzled, between the lines, I think she saw that as somewhat of a threat. I don't know if that was the intent or not. She took it that way. And after that, she started naming Eric Swalwell by name in her posts.
I have heard from sitting members of Congress, former Congresspeople, staffers, former staffers, content creators, journalists, tons and tons and tons of people at this point, that there are widespread allegations and conversations about power imbalances around.
As soon as she starts saying his name, she started getting more messages saying, yes, I've had this experience. And she became somewhat of a clearinghouse for these women who hadn't talked about their stories publicly, but felt comfortable sharing with her as a social media influencer.
That special parasocial relationship.
It's fascinating. While it would feel kind of scary to reach out to an investigative reporter, maybe this was the intermediary step that people could feel comfortable with.
So as you say, when Fodor heard from Wolf, she didn't respond to her. Instead, she escalated. Meanwhile, Cheyenne Hunt, a new party, a lawyer and former Democratic congressional candidate, received a message from a close friend. It was pivotal. What did it say?
This friend said, I was harassed by Eric Swalwell, and her friend specifically said to her it was because it felt like his campaign for governor was getting steam. And I think that she was distraught at the fact that he could be in a position to have such a powerful job. She knew that her friend Cheyenne had this quite large platform and asked her to make this post. So that was 2 weeks ago. I mean, the timeline of this is so incredibly fast. Cheyenne does this post.
The Democratic candidate currently leading in the California governor's race has a known history of being predatory towards women. And while it may be...
Cheyenne and Ariel don't know each other, which I think is also a fascinating element of this. But word gets back to Ariel that Cheyenne is planning to put this post up the night before. And that's actually the first time they connect. And I think for Ariel, it was this really redemptive moment, right? Because I think she felt very lonely. And to now have a second person say, I also know of these allegations. They could then sort of work together to both keep the drumbeat up of this publicly, but they were also gathering these women's stories to then connect them with journalists so they could go through sort of the traditional media vetting.
Hunt and Fodor started seeking pro bono legal counsel for the women. And as you said, they decided to take their stories to the press. I'm just wondering, why didn't they just make the charges themselves?
I think even in this Wild West new media landscape where creators have a lot of influence, these two women at least knew that in order to have the most credibility, to have the most impact, it would be important to have the imprimatur of a known news organization. They primarily worked with CNN and established relationships with the reporters there and felt comfortable connecting these women to these reporters.
And particularly one named Allison Gordon?
Allison, I think, was the primary conduit. And that was really important that there was this streamlined process, right? They weren't sort of dispersing these women of like, you talk to this reporter, you talk to this reporter. Having CNN and knowing then with CNN, they would have all of their guardrails, right? Their editorial processes, their lawyers. I mean, that thing was not going to be published until it was very, very worked through. I think that these influencers knew that they could never offer that. So that's why they thought it was important to have the actual details be disclosed in the press.
And then the big day, Friday, April 10th, the news stories drop, first in the San Francisco Chronicle, then on CNN.
CNN has new exclusive reporting about Congressman Eric Swalwell. The Democrat is running for California.
How did they describe that day to you?
The story comes out, and what Cheyenne told me is they all just burst into tears. It was just this like big cathartic moment of like, oh my God, this is finally out there. It's been kind of full tilt ever since. I was just watching Cheyenne on CNN. They are out talking to reporters. They're being very public about what their role is because they see this as a movement that they want to continue to keep up beyond the Eric Swalwell story.
He may have had wide support, but certainly not deep support, because within a week, Eric Swalwell had suspended his campaign for governor, resigned from Congress, and then the Manhattan DA opened a criminal investigation. His closest allies and friends abandoned him. You've reported on MeToo stories. You know they can be very tough. You're asking these women, mostly women, to trust you with traumatic moments from their lives. We've seen over and over again how it often doesn't go well for these women, depending on who their attacker was. How remarkable is it then that Fodor and Hunt were able to collect these stories and get them to press so quickly with such rapid and massive consequences for Swalwell?
It's stunning When I was talking to Cheyenne and realized that from the day she got involved to the day the stories ran, it was just 11 days, I was stunned because I do have experience reporting these stories. And when they're newsworthy, you certainly are working as fast as you can, but as responsibly as you can. And so much of that is about establishing trust, building these types of relationships, and then also interrogating these stories too, right? I mean, that's the responsible role of the press. The fact that they were able to do that on such a compressed timeline, I do think speaks to how the influencer relationship sped that trust building process. So the journalists could then very quickly focus on trying to get corroboration and all of the other necessary steps of turning these stories around. Cheyenne said this is not a green light for content creators to think that they're investigative journalists with sensitive stories. I mean, there's a role for them clearly, but people should not think that this is going to be a replacement for investigative journalism.
You look at the trail of harassed women in our president's wake, and it seems like we live in an age where it's very tough to hold politicians, especially those at the top, accountable. And the MeToo movement seems like such a long time ago and almost quaint, like maybe providing stories and evidence of bad behavior doesn't matter anymore. So do you see this story as a continuation of the MeToo movement or something else?
I've thought about this a lot because we saw such a rush of attention and reckoning and self-examination in 2017 and 2018 during the MeToo movement. And then we absolutely saw a reaction to that, a backlash. And so now this is maybe like a reaction to the reaction, right? And I think that that's the way that things happen a lot in politics, is it's not a line one way or the other, it's a pendulum.
Is it a reaction to a reaction, or is it just that Swalwell turned out to be an easy target? I mean, no one's going to lose anything if he goes down.
Absolutely. The allegations against him are so serious that nobody would want to associate themselves with him. But there was a moment that really stood out to me as this story was being covered that I think is sort of indicative of how things have changed since Me Too. Alex Michelson, who's a CNN anchor, had Swalwell's lawyer on the show. And Swalwell's lawyer said what we've often heard when pushing back against allegations of sexual assault.
These women, certain of them, have reached out to the congressman on multiple occasions, wishing him nothing but the best, saying that they'd vote for him for governor, asking for references for jobs, attending social events with him. So, looking at the facts, I do have to question the credibility of these allegations.
And Alex on TV said,
you know that there's a long history and a lot of evidence of sexual assault experts who say that the victims often go back to the perpetrators.
I don't think that that's something that would have been said on TV so quickly in 2017.
Hell no.
There were some things that stuck. There is absolutely cultural changes. And, remember Cheyenne and Ariel, they were 8-9 years younger at the time. I mean, I do think there's a generational difference that you're now seeing the charge being led by Gen Z women. That's another factor here that we should keep in mind.
Another factor is the power of influencers.
I personally, as a journalist, did not appreciate how strong that reach actually was. Mm-hmm. They had put together a list of content creators that they were going to blast the story out to when these stories came out. And they said that those creators collectively had an audience of 200 million people. I mean, there's not a media outlet in the world that would have that kind of reach. Wow. These are an important player in our news information environment.
Melanie, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Melanie Mason is Politico's California bureau chief and co-author of the California Playbook. She reported this story with Jeremy White. Coming up, more scandals exposed. This is On the Media.
WNYC Studios is supported by Atio, the AI CRM for modern teams. Atio is the CRM that actually knows what's going on. Every customer, email, and call becomes context Atio can act on instantly. Need to prep for a meeting? Done. Stuck on what to write in that follow-up? Already drafted. Want to know how to win this deal? Just ask Atio. Powered by Universal Context, Atio's intelligence layer, you can search, update, and create with AI across your entire customer ecosystem. Ask more from your CRM. Ask Atio. Try Atio for free by going to atio.com/WNYC. That's ATTIO.com/WNYC.
From the trusted team behind 48 Hours, welcome to Case by Case, your weekly update on the biggest true crime stories unfolding right now.
Nick Ryder remains in custody without bail.
Luigi Mangione accused of stalking and gunning down United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
From high-profile trials and stunning evidence to major breaks in cold cases, we'll follow it all case by case. Follow and listen to 48 Hours Case by Case wherever you get your podcasts.
This is On the Media. I'm Brooke Gladstone. Last Sunday, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban was on the ballot for re-election. He and his party Fidesz lost big.
Tonight, Hungary's Viktor Orban has conceded defeat in what he called a, quote, painful election. Voters turned out in record numbers to end his 16-year increasingly authoritarian rule. Now, Orban was backed by both the Kremlin and the White House, something you don't hear every day. Vice President Vance even visiting Budapest last week to campaign for him.
I've seen a guy who has ferociously advocated for the interests of Hungary. I'm here to help him in this campaign cycle.
Orban had systematically brought Hungary's institutions under state control, from the courts to the education system to the press, gutting the democratic checks to his power. And Orban's style of, quote, democratic illiberalism served as a kind of manual for President Trump and the MAGA right, dubbed the Hungarian model. Márton Gulyás is a founder and lead anchor of Hungary's top independent news show, a YouTube channel called Partizan. On our show last spring, he explained how Partizan played a vital role in the rise of Peter Magyar, now Hungary's prime minister-elect.
He said that he's fed up with the style of the government, with the misconduct of the public funds and the level of corruption and the concentration of power in Orban's hand.
Márton says that before appearing on Partizan, one of Hungary's very few outlets that feature opposition voices, Peter Magyar was an insider, but not a politician.
He was a kind of whistleblower coming from within the system, telling the audience what kind of scandals he witnessed within the circle.
And there were scandals galore, but few resonated like this one in February 2024.
Hungary's president at the time, Katalin Novák, pardoned someone who was convicted for helping the head of a foster home cover up child abuse, basically. It brought about the downfall of Katalin Novák, and it brought about the rise of Peter Magyar.
Ivan Nagy is a political journalist from Hungary, now Delacorte Fellow at the Columbia Journalism Review. We spoke to him twice this month, both before and after Hungary's historic election. Nagy says that the rapid erosion in Orban's seemingly invulnerable power base began with that bombshell story, which quickly brought down Hungary's then president, a largely ceremonial post.
President Novák, before she was appointed the president of Hungary, was the Minister of Family Affairs for Orban. The huge position created solely for her and for her successors because one of Orban's main political platforms is being a pro-family government, offering all sorts of tax breaks and financial advances to families who have multiple children. It's what he uses to try to sugarcoat his very anti-LGBTQ stance in social life. And to find out that your president pardoned someone who helped cover up a crime, that is huge.
You know, it feels so kind of quaint that Hungarians still care about outrageous hypocrisy.
I mean, from day one, investigative work has kept an eye on this regime. But it's virtually impossible to break through the noise, and especially to have a story that penetrated beyond a certain bubble of society that could access free information. Because one of the building blocks of this regime is the complete isolation of huge populations from verified, objective news.
Back to the interview that Magyar did, the one that went viral. You say it kicked off some of the first real backlash that Orban has seen during his regime. What were these stories that no one paid attention to?
prior to the child abuse story. For instance, one of these stories is that in the 2010s, public money from Hungary's central bank was funneled into non-governmental organizations. On paper, charities, all led and run by people who are related to either the son of the head of the national bank or his business circles. And what ended up happening is that around $1.5 billion worth of Hungarian forints were embezzled and lost. This is something that journalists have covered for years, that the business circles of the central bank leader's son have gotten so rich that they actually purchased skyline apartments, condos in Manhattan's Fifth Avenue. And these are the kind of things that never really reached broader society. It's mostly corruption related. Hungary's richest man was once the pipe fitter, the gas man of Viktor Orban, a childhood friend. And now virtually in every industry in Hungary, he owns a majority stake. These kinds of things journalists have covered for long. But one of the many reasons that didn't resonate with people is that people are doing relatively well off in Hungary. Orban paid a lot of attention to making sure that the amount of money that people see in their bank accounts or in their wallets is just always slightly a little more than the month before or the year before.
All people, Ivan, or just the elite?
Obviously, Orban's business circles were the biggest beneficiaries of his governance. But what Orban has done to guarantee his success is to make the most vulnerable parts of society feel like they're better off. Wages have actually risen consistently from 2010 until 2022. People felt like they had more money on their bank accounts. Now, the problem was, and what we try to report on, is that at the same time, Hungary has the highest value-added tax in the world, 27% on every purchase. Hungary has had, after COVID and the war in Ukraine, a 25% inflation rate. All sorts of other economic measures that Orban imposed on businesses all trickled down to the consumer level.
So surely the electorate would have noticed that.
Except they did not, because on the surface, it did look like they had more money on their bank accounts. And that was kind of the magic of Orban. A lot of times before elections, we had seen all sorts of cash advances and tax breaks and many, many ways in which people would see a large amount of money reach their bank accounts. His regime started to crumble only in the past 4 years because of all the economic crises, because of COVID, because of the war in Ukraine. They're connecting the dots. And here's Peter Magyar, someone who's been in front of the public eye for 2 years and telling them that you're struggling to pay your rent. I'm pointing to the guy who's responsible for it. It's because of him. Look at his cronies on their yachts. Look at his family getting rich while you're getting poorer. See?
We've often looked at Hungary as an example of democratic backsliding, where the press seemed to have less and less influence.
Having been an independent journalist in Hungary for 5 years, I only left a year and a half ago. Hostility was the kind of baseline emotion that you were feeling when you were out reporting, especially if you're reporting on rallies connected to Orban. It became a kind of rite of passage to receive your first death threat through email. What has changed over the past couple of years, and especially in the past couple of months running up to this election, has been that Orban, for the first time, really acts like someone who's in danger.
You've noted that a half dozen whistleblowers have given tell-all interviews about how the regime operates.
Yeah.
Orban is all over the tabloids now.
There is a saying in Hungarian which roughly translates to, we've known, but we never thought. Everyone knows officials can be bribed, but until someone gets investigated and taken down for this, people pretend like it doesn't exist. And now more and more people are coming out to speak up from the army. Someone had a tell-all interview for a press outlet called Telex about just how much it is politically controlled instead of professionally controlled, and how much power Viktor Orban's own son has within the army to do whatever he wants. Another very explosive interview a couple of weeks ago, an investigator from the Hungarian police force revealed that the government, through the Secret Service, have been surveilling Peter Magyar's party and tried to compromise members of Peter Magyar's IT team to bring down the internal network of the party. We've known that Orban's been surveilling the opposition and journalists since 2019, when it turned out that his government has installed spyware on dozens of people's phones in the independent press and NGO sphere and political spheres. We've known Viktor Orban's son had virtually unlimited power in the army because we've had investigative reporting about it. We've known of all of these things, but we never thought of all of these things, right? I don't know if it makes sense, but the point is, if you have a regime which is in many ways held together by fear, people deciding, being fully aware of the potential consequences to still talk to the media kind of shows how much of this imaginary power you have left.
You quoted journalist Noemi Martini saying that, quote, if someone lit up a match, the place would explode.
She was referring to just how much tensions have overboiled in this election campaign. Even from an ocean away, I feel it on my skin. Bombshell after bombshell in the media, explosive revelations about the government every other day, Viktor Orban and his government coming up with new narratives every other day. You have sex scandals, you have pedophilia scandals, corruption scandals, foreign policy scandals, you have spy games. And this is another thing that Noemi told me, people want this to end.
So, Magyar wins. What have we got? A paradise of press freedom?
I wish any politician could promise a paradise of press freedom. So Peter Magyar, here's the thing about him. You're being compared to Viktor Orban. You can only be great for the press. And Peter Magyar is a super professional politician. He has a very detailed political platform, a program, has a whole section on how he would restructure public media. That is something the Hungarians want. That is something the Hungarians need. And as I've mentioned, he's already much more open, like he gives interviews to independent outlets.
And you say that Magyar has a toxic habit, a very thin skin, evidently.
Peter Magyar is very active on social media, which means Facebook in Hungary. And every time one of the larger independent outlets writes about him critically, whether that's about his platform or investigating his past, whatever, he shows up in the comment section and launches a tirade against the news outlet, accusing them of being funded by the government or just putting laughing and crying emojis. And because he has built a cult following, because let's face it, people believe in him. Many people believe in him as the Messiah. Many of his followers follow him in the act. You see mass unsubscriptions from outlets if they write something critical about Magyar. You see people sending texts and threats like, why are you in the way of the change of the regime? You're supposed to be on our side. And this is why I believe that there has to be a very steep learning curve in Hungary for media literacy, because people will need to understand that these same people who had been scrutinizing Viktor Orban because he had unrestricted power for 16 years. Who else would you be looking at? The opposition who has no political power? No. Obviously, the press was scrutinizing the one man and his regime that's defined this era of Hungarian history. And people will need to learn that the press is not there to bash Orban. The press is always there to scrutinize the one in power.
We recently had Vox's Zach Beecham on to talk about how countries display democratic resilience. He referenced Brazil, South Korea, Poland. Poland in particular, though, is showing signs of potentially waffling back toward the right wing. Given the mixed messages from Magyar, how sustainable is this current and fragile, perhaps, resilience?
Democratic resilience is a very touchy subject in Central and Eastern Europe. In all of the countries that once used to be the part of the Soviet sphere of influence, they've only had really 3 decades of experience with democracy. That's not enough to build resilience. That's enough to build a basic understanding as long as everyone plays along. And in these countries, you mentioned Poland, but you can also mention the Czech Republic, you can also mention Slovakia, people have not been playing along. Figures like Viktor Orban have not been playing along, or figures like Robert Fico in Slovakia have not been playing along. The reason they have not is that they understood that these democratic foundations in the society are not strong enough to actually withstand the pressure of an autocrat. So talking about resilience in countries which barely understand democracy in the first place, societies that have barely had an experience with democracy in the first place, and then 15 or 20 years in, we're subjected to an autocrat, it's kind of starting again. And there's something that, educated, glasses wearing, blue shirt wearing, well-groomed individuals like myself from large cities can actually delve into and talk about. But it's not an issue that concerns these societies. These societies are concerned with having enough money in the bank to buy enough food, to pay for rent, to be able to buy a new refrigerator if the old one breaks. That is the focus of life for the overwhelming majority of society. So to answer your question ultimately, nobody knows if any bounce back in terms of democracy would last in Hungary. Just as much as we don't know anywhere else in the region, and obviously we're getting more and more skeptical of just how resilient democracies are in the US or in the UK or across the European Union countries. But what is certain is that Peter Magyar would come to government to establish a democracy, partly because he is a Democrat, while he in many ways resembles an old version of Viktor Orban, who's very charismatic, who has this center-right Christian kind of approach to governance that is very popular in Hungary's society. He is at heart a Democrat. And not only that, he will have a lot of pressure on him. One of the things that keeps coming back in reports when people go to his rallies in the countryside, I myself have followed him for an entire day on the campaign trail last summer, is just how much faith people put in him. Just how much people expect of him. He can't let the country down. So that alone should guarantee some sort of democratic fortune for Hungary in the coming years. But in the long run, it's going to be years and years and years and decades of consistent pro-democratic politics just to establish some baseline democratic resilience.
Hungarian political journalist Ivan Nagy. Coming up, we call on Ivan again after election night in Budapest to get him to describe what he saw and ponder what happens next. This is On the Media.
WNYC Studios is supported by Pulitzer on the Road, the official podcast of the Pulitzer Prizes, back with its third season. Each spring, 23 prizes are awarded for distinguished journalism, books, drama, and music. Pulitzer on the Road brings conversations with prize winners to you. You'll hear from The New Yorker's David Remnick and Carlos Lozada of The New York Times, authors Natasha Trethewey and Lucy Sant, and journalists Nariman Al-Mufti and Tulu Olorunipa. Listen to Pulitzer on the Road wherever you get your podcasts.
On the Media is supported by the Stupski Foundation, presenting the new book, Control: Why Big Giving Falls Short. If you're a regular listener to On the Media, you know Brooke and I spend a lot of time deconstructing the narratives of power, who holds it, how they wield it, and the systems that keep it that way. There's a new book that I think is particularly timely. It's called Control: Why Big Giving Falls Short. Author Glenn Galich, CEO of the Stupski Foundation, offers a rare insider view exposing why billionaire and millionaire donors move so slowly while communities battle urgent crises. In Control: Why Big Giving Falls Short, Galich reveals how our philanthropic system and culture encourage excessive donor control and keep over $2 trillion from reaching communities. By prioritizing wealthy donor interests, power, and control, this system doesn't simply slow social progress, it structurally prevents it. If you're interested in how extreme wealth shapes our society and how to fix it, this is a great book to read. Order your copy of Control: Why Big Giving Falls Short by Glenn Galich. That's Control: Why Big Giving Falls Short, out now.
From the trusted team behind 48 Hours, welcome to Case by Case, your weekly update on the biggest true crime stories unfolding right now.
Nick Reiner remains in custody without bail.
Luigi Mangione accused of stalking and gunning down United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
From high-profile trials and stunning evidence to major breaks in cold cases, we'll follow it all case by case. Follow and listen to 48 Hours Case by Case wherever you get your podcasts.
This is On the Media. I'm Brooke Gladstone. Hungary's TISA party, led by Prime Minister-elect Peter Magyar, secured an astonishing two-thirds majority in parliament. Hungarian journalist Ivan Nagy, who you just heard a minute ago, was in Budapest on election day and told us what he saw and felt.
I'm still trying to find the words. I spent most of the night in the press tent, not far from where Peter Magyar announced the next chapter in Hungarian history. But a little later, I got to join people on the street, and what I saw was complete and utter euphoria. Hundreds of thousands of people, not just from Budapest apartments. People from the countryside took the train up to Budapest so they'd be there to see the results and then eventually celebrate. I later on went on a live TV show just to kind of check in. I tried to find a quiet place somewhere far enough from the crowds, and I got ambushed on live television. All of those things that you usually see when you look at foreign coverage of like a quote-unquote revolution abroad.
Or soccer games.
Yeah, very similar. I mean, the only similar atmosphere I can recall from this country was 10 years ago when Hungary qualified for the European Championships in soccer and won its first game, and the whole city came to a standstill. And this was much bigger than that.
A lot of people were disappointed by the results, right? Where are they?
There are some of them, yes. This regime had a massive clientele. It had political influencers, it had pro-government journalists, propagandists, it had thousands of people making a echo chamber of pro-government messages on social media and on the airwaves of public media. All sorts of quasi-government actors in quasi-scientific think tanks, and obviously in all sorts of government offices. We tend to see kind of three responses to the result. One is the staying silent, laying low kind of response, which some of the ministers have done. The other one is the we're going to stick together, work from opposition and turn this around because the nationalists in this country need us. Their argument is that still 2.5 million people voted for Viktor Orban, maybe a bit fewer, which could sound like a good argument, but at the same time, people in a very resounding manner voted for regime change. So I don't know how much that argument holds up. And then the third kind of people are what I find the most fascinating as a journalist are the ones who are leaving the Fidesz camp, at least for a moment, to go and talk to independent media and start pointing fingers at who's to blame for this loss.
As you predicted, Magyar shut down the state broadcaster, M1. In fact, he went on the channel after he won to confront some hosts directly to say, quote, "What has been happening here since 2010 is something that Goebbels or the North Korean leadership would admire. Not a single true word being spoken. This cannot continue." Do you think most Hungarians even care?
Turning state media into propaganda was one of the original sins of this past government. And it's been a very important campaign promise of Peter Magyar to shut it down altogether. Now, what happened was that Peter Magyar was invited for an interview for only the second and third time in his political career. So he went on state radio first and then state TV. And both reporters tried to provoke him, tried to personally insult him. I mean, it's a bold and in some ways audacious move to sit down in front of someone who'd been a voice of this propaganda channel for a decade, look them in the eye and tell them straight that you're out of a job, we're shutting this whole thing down. But that is what Hungarians voted for. State TV, state radio, and state service radio. What I mean by that is the state news agency, which delivers news to all radio channels across the country. They still remain the primary source of information for millions of Hungarians. Now, we haven't really found like the in-depth reporting so far of how this result has gone down in the countryside, but news broadcasts on public TV started kind of sounding like the truth. They reported on the victory. They cited, for the first time that I can remember, independent news outlets. They talked to experts who were not paid by the government. And I can only assume that it's a massive shock in places that still believe this regime was going to carry on. I think right now the country's in a shock, both those who are shocked by how large the victory was and are celebrating it, but by also those who are now figuring out that they'd been living in a fabricated world for so long.
Now, state broadcasters were just a small part of it. It's estimated that Orban's Fidesz party controlled 80% of the country's media, mostly press that's in private hands. Are these guys going to see the writing on the wall and switch how they cover the news?
I think we're going to have to wait and see. There's still months before he can actually start running the country in practice. Many of these outlets, that kind of 80% share of the media market, were not profitable. They were either supported by oligarchs close to the government or through state advertising. Now, state advertising will be gone.
Right.
It's going to be gone on day one of Peter Magyar being in office. But also, I'm interested to see how oligarchs will react. Because if the whole Fidesz camp starts to crumble, at the end of the day, they might just remain businessmen who will not want to invest in projects that are not profitable. And out of that 80%, it's hard to name more than one or two that are even remotely profitable.
It could be a laboratory for how to get people interested in what you're writing, regular news consumers, or how to make them news consumers. This is actually a very ripe time to make Hungary's population news interested because there'll be so much change.
This is indeed the one opportunity to get this right. This is the mandate that Peter Magyar has received. If he plays his cards right, that would be fantastic for the society of Hungary on the long run. To have a public media that many other European countries have, one that really does not only serve their interests by delivering impartial and objective news, but also cultural content and educative content and all those things that you associate public media with. What the private actors will do, those independent outlets that had survived the 16 years of Orbanism will continue to be the main source of information for much of the country. The other ones, those ones who were on government payroll, will have a very tough time building their reputation back.
Mm-hmm. So Magyar himself rose to national prominence through independent media, an upstart website. Much of the reporting that chipped away at Orban's support came from these tiny independent media outlets. I guess that says good stuff about journalism's ability to persevere under an authoritarian leader. Or is it simply that Magyar was the perfect person at the right time, a conservative that wouldn't scare the vast majority of conservatives in Hungary, and yet someone who challenged the most extreme impulses of the ruling autocrat?
I would say both things that you say are correct. So on the one hand, yes, his whole career started on an interview on this YouTube channel called Partizan, which now has 600,000 subscribers.
Which is a lot by Hungary standards.
That is a lot by Hungarian standards. And Partizan received the first question at Peter Magyar's first press conference as Prime Minister-elect. Peter Magyar said that the person that you've now just listened to works for Partizan, a channel that filled the gap for public media when public media was propaganda and a place where my political career began. He also praised the next journalist who asked him a question, Balázs Kaufmann, who was the investigative writer who first reported on the presidential pardon scandal that started the entire downfall of the Viktor Orban regime. So he really does recognize that the press was an important part of keeping the light of democracy alive. On the other hand, what you mentioned in your question is that Peter Magyar was really the right person at the right time. The same channel, Partizan, conducted a survey of TISA voters to see what their political alignment was, and it was perfectly aligned that the same amount of people were left and right and center. It was clearly a popular front that Peter Magyar has led, but it was very important to him to be the kind of Christian Democrat, center-right person that could not only talk to those opposition people in Budapest who were going to vote for him nevertheless, but actually connect with those people disenchanted from right-wing Fidesz. As we're talking right now, by the way, they have just fired the number one commercial TV channel's news director. Mind you, the number one commercial channel is owned by Viktor Orban's top oligarch, and it is a propaganda channel. As we're talking, it happened.
Wow. So things are moving fast. I'm just wondering if at that press conference, the two reporters that he praised asked Magyar really difficult questions, because he'll flood social media with pushback if he gets challenged. Are there any signs yet that his sensitivity may interfere with his efforts to reform the media landscape?
Not yet. And this is a tricky, and thank you for mentioning this, because this is a tricky relationship. Because on the one hand, Magyar will, especially for the foreign observers, will want to look like someone who champions press freedom. At the same time, he does seem to have thin skin. In this moment, I feel like every question you ask him is a tough question. The Hungarian outlets are going to be asking about the dismantling of this current regime. But since he's not in power yet, what is there to hold him to account on? We don't know if he's going to deliver on his promises. Right now, there's just way too many questions, and Magyar has been giving straight answers to those. But mind you, he's giving the answers that he's been giving on the campaign trail. So in that sense, it's not very different now than it was a week ago.
Mm-hmm. When did you leave Hungary?
I left in August 2024.
Uh-huh. Was there something that pushed you?
At that point, I spent the entirety of my early 20s working in the Hungarian press. And it was the greatest honor in that sense that I ran a very popular news analysis podcast, and I wrote political analysis and columns that I felt resonated with a lot of people. And I did feel like the work that but more importantly, my colleagues in my newsroom and in other newsrooms are doing was essential. But at the same time, I did feel like it was taking a toll on me. Under Orban, if you did this job as enthusiastically as a journalist should, it invaded your private life to an extent that went way beyond what is normal for a journalist, which is in the first place not normal for any normal person that's not a journalist. But it went far beyond that.
How would you describe the way it went beyond even the normal devotion to the craft?
I would argue that people who cover politics in the US right now, or over the past little more than a year, but in some ways over the past decade, kind of understand a feeling that you keep questioning yourself, what is the point of all of this? When political life and social life has become so absurd, and then the value of journalism has become so much lower in society, partly because of political actors wanting it to be low, you just wonder, like, what even is the point of covering all of this? Because you can't really hold people to account. You can't really access the information that you want to access. You see yourself being discredited at all times. You see a lot of hate flowing through you. I think that is a feeling that's not very alien to reporters in the US right now. And then Orban's oligarchs purchased media organizations in Hungary and then turned them around to echo certain political messages. Wonder where I've heard that recently. And the point is that, no, we were not suffering in the sense that we were not beaten up on the street. We were not thrown into jail. At the end of the day, it was a European Union country where all the repression was legal. And when you're doing things the legal way, there's only a certain distance you can go in going after your opponents. But it was taking a toll on everyone. And then I had a wonderful opportunity to come study in New York at Columbia University's journalism school. And then I got stuck here for the best.
For the best. So you don't think you'll go back?
See, that's a question that I haven't even answered when my family asks, so I might not do it right here on the radio. But to give you some sort of wishy-washy answer to this, we will have to wait and see. This is a momentary euphoria. We know that history keeps moving, and sometimes things that we thought were gone for good return. That is certain that Hungary is going to be under huge economic strain because of what Viktor Orban has left. It's going to be very challenging for Peter Magyar to pull this country together, or anyone else in the future, you know. What is this? It's day 4 after 16 years of Viktor Orban in power. It's very, very early to judge. There's a momentary relief, then the country in that sense, society in that sense is healing, but whether it has healed to the extent that someone wants to move back from the brilliant city of New York, I think it would be very early to say that Hungary is back on track.
It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Hungarian political journalist Ivan Nagy is now Delacorte Fellow at the Columbia Journalism Review. And that's the show. On the Media is produced by Molly Rosen, Rebecca Clark-Callender, and Candace Wong, with help from Macy Henslick-Barrett. Travis Mannon is our video producer. Our technical director is Jennifer Munson, with engineering from Jared Paul. Eloise Blondio is our senior producer, and our executive producer is Katya Rogers. On the Media is produced by WNYC. Micah Lowinger will be back next week. I'm Brooke Gladstone.
Every day, WNYC Studios is working to get closer to New York and to New Yorkers. The underwriting we get from businesses helps power our independence. Learn how your organization can join in at sponsorship.wnyc.org.